It was almost time for the Passover festival, so Jesus went to Jerusalem. There in the temple, he found people selling cattle, sheep, and pigeons, and also the money changers sitting at their tables. He made a whip from cords and drove all the animals out of the temple, both the sheep and the cattle. He overturned the tables of the money changers and scattered their coins. And he ordered those who sold pigeons,
"Take them out of here!" "Stop making my father's house a marketplace!"
His disciples remembered that the scripture says, "My devotion to your house, O God, burns in me like a fire." The Jewish authorities came back at him with a question.
What miracle can you perform to show us that you have the right to do this?
Tear down this temple, and in 3 days I will build it again.
Are you going to build it again in 3 days?
It has taken 46 years to build this temple.
But the temple Jesus was speaking about was his body.
One of the disciples says to another, "He's gone mad. He's using force, and by what authority? He's exerted power and pushed people around, and he's asking us to follow him. What sort of leader is he? He's gone off on his own." Some might say single-minded. He hasn't waited for the rest of us. History will note this action. He's gone in and created a scene, and now it's impossible to back out or turn away. This is going to be the end of us and him. His political career, and possibly his life. And the scary thing is, he's dragged us along with him. He said, "This has gone on too long. Something has to change." In his now infamous speech, he says, "You shall not make my Father's house a den of thieves." You know what? I feel like kicking over tables this morning too. Get angry. Well, not really. It's my table, it's okay. A mad Jesus, an angry Jesus. Is this the picture we have before us? How do you feel about the angry Jesus? Today's gospel story reminds us of the suburban garage sale. Clearing out the shed. Thank you, Chris. Great segue into... Had it planned all along, didn't we? Yeah. Next Saturday, we'll be here clearing out the sheds. The junk that nobody wants. The stuff that we might sell on Gumtree. That some poor fool might pay money for. Now, I'm not good at clearing out my shed, but when I do, I make a good job of it. I'm pretty ruthless, and decisions need to be made. And sometimes those decisions hurt because decisions mean things like sentimental value need to go. Something you've held on to for such a long time needs to be got rid of. Sometimes a tough decision has to be made, and leaders make tough decisions all the time. Jesus made a decision. We make decisions. Sometimes as Christians, we have to say and do things that we don't like having to say or do. A Christian can't be one of the crowd where others might be willing to let things slide. A Christian has to deal with the problems if they remain true to our beliefs. In fact, one of the difficult things about being a Christian is at times that you are no longer have the luxury of turning aside when injustice is abounding or when there's a problem. You cannot look in the other direction. Christians, if we are to take the example of Jesus seriously, are called to take responsibility for making the world right, even when that task is unpleasant. Sometimes this calls for taking stock of our situation and clearing out our house. There was a time in Jesus' ministry when he found himself in the midst of a bad situation, a desperate need of some good overhaul. He couldn't and certainly wouldn't look in the other direction any longer. Instead, Jesus did something that no one expected him to do. The saying, desperate times call for desperate measures, might apply to this story from John's Gospel. As we are drawn into the temple courtyards, the outer courtyards of the temple, not the temple itself, not the Holy of Holies, but in the surrounding courtyards in the time of Jesus. If you can see that as you can see, it was quite unlike a modern church. It was a very big complex, fixed with buildings, courtyards, and open spaces, and walls and towers. And the purpose of the temple was to offer sacrifice to God in the Holy of Holies. There was a market going on in the outer courtyards. Nowadays, we bring our stewardship offering in an envelope, or we might use a direct debit system on our credit card or debit card. Most offerings, on the other hand, in the temple day were rather noisy because they were alive. Sheep, goats, pigeons, whatever. They were alive when they reached the temple. And if you didn't have one, or one was not good enough, you could buy one at the temple. You could buy a suitable offering, or you had to exchange your local street money into temple money, because nothing unholy was to come into the temple. Jesus knew that ordinary people were being cheated, were being ripped off in this holiest of holiest places. Some less than honest officials had seen in this system a market opportunity. Those who inspected the offering might have been your turtle dove or your sheep, your lamb or your goat, and looked at it and said, no, this is not good enough. It's got a spot on it. Here, buy one of mine. And you can imagine they didn't have digital scales in those days for weighing out the money. So the bag would have been a bit like, yeah, this is about right. And, might have been a few rocks in that one. And, there was things going on that were a bit dodgy. There was a sales opportunity as money needed to be exchanged and offerings needed to be bought. Seeing this going on, Jesus got mad. For the one and only time in the gospel, he seems to have lost his temper completely. He picks up cords and makes a whip It starts to strike out at the animal sellers and the money changers. Did Jesus lose his temper because of the cheating that was going on holy ground? Or did Jesus lose his temper because the poor were being taken for a ride and being ripped off in the name of religion? Pick one if you like. The truth of the gospel story is that ordinary people, realizing that they could not keep God's law, sought to approach God with a sacrifice in order to atone. They were being cheated at the point of their life where they should have been nurtured. Rather than merely reforming the system and slapping a few hands and telling the priests and their assistants to do better, Jesus calls down judgment upon them. A new temple will be raised. A temple not made of stone, but of human flesh. A temple that is open for all. A temple of all people. So what does this story tell us of today? Well, I think two things at least. The first, be active and don't look away from injustice or wrongdoing. This is the Jesus who turns heads. Certainly he's no Jesus meek and mild in this situation. Here Jesus displays passion and integrity and authority and power. I see in this story a call for us as a call to engage in righting wrongs, to speak out, particularly into political, social and economic events in which we find ourselves, and no greater time than in the upcoming election time. Ask the questions, seek the answers, march on the streets, whichever way you vote, doesn't matter. Well, it does matter, but you know what I mean. I'm not telling you how to vote. And as the church, as individuals within it, we are called to follow Jesus, and sometimes we are called to speak a hard word into a particular situation. We may be called to be a prophet or an evangelist. We may be called to be a social activist. We may be called to speak into moments of peacemaking and reconciliation. We might be a reconciler in times of broken relationships. And secondly, the story places a question in our own personal lives. What in our lives need changing or cleaning or clearing out? When we think we've got it all together, when we think we've got all our lives all sorted out, hokey-dory, we're all okay, God in Jesus comes along and upturns our tables and scatters our coins. Scatters our status, our security, our preconceived understandings, and says, take it away. Take it away. So what in our lives need to be exposed to the soaking love of God and the cleansing grace of Jesus? Our religion, our prayer, our attitude, resources of time and skill and money, our political and social outlook. Clean it up, Jesus. Clean us up. What would Jesus do standing in the temple of your heart or your life? What would he see? An unjust transaction? An argument? Words said under your breath? Your failure to speak out in times of need or change? If Jesus had a garage sale in your life, how would he get on? What would he put in the skip? I think we all fail to stand before Jesus and not have something cleared out of our life. The good news, or the gospel in this message today, is that Jesus didn't say that he would leave the temple in chaos or disrepair. He didn't say, clear it out and leave it in a shambles. His desire was to turn it back into its proper position. He said, pull it down, and I'll raise it up in 3 days in a new form. Jesus says to us, get rid of those things. Get rid of the clutter. Get rid of the baggage that's stifling you. Put it aside. Fling wide the gates and let me in and open yourself. And haven't we done that every time we share in Holy Communion? Every fortnight or so when we gather around, we break bread together and we share the cup, the very life of Jesus that we take into ourselves. Aren't we just taking in Jesus? Jesus says, I will step in the place of religion and follow me. I myself will cleanse you. I will set you free. I will energize you. I will give you life and sustenance. I will give my life in your place. If you want nice and acceptable, feel-good religion, don't come looking for Jesus. Not this Jesus. Not this angry Jesus. Not this Jesus who upsets religion and turns over tables and says, get it out of here. You can walk into any bookshop and find those self-help sections full of realization religion and spirituality and this, that and the other techniques. But if you want to hand yourself over to God, body, soul and mind, to the God of the universe, to the scary Jesus, then you're going to be coming along for the ride of your life. I want to share with you just a little prayer poem. And it says this: truth be told, Jesus, there are lots of tables that need overturning in our lives. Beneath the veneer of respectability and tidy rows and neat regulations, hide dark addictions and angry judgments, hungry greeds and heartless rejections. We know the pain, and so do those around us, of keeping up the facade. What a relief it would be to have it all upset, smashed, scattered, destroyed. So perhaps, Jesus, today you would pay us a visit and help us to radically rearrange the furniture of our lives. Amen.